Hey everybody, welcome to Yamo's Hey Bucks. I'm Andy Evans, and unfortunately today we are without one of our counterparts, the other half of the show, Mr. Drew Sample. So that led my producer, Mr. Adam Dell, and myself to take an extensive, exhaustive search to seek out a qualified candidate to fill his shoes. And after much pleading and begging and potentially a bribe or two, we settled on this gentleman who was kind enough to take some time out of his Sunday afternoon to hop on, talk a little bit of Ohio State football after a big win over the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. From BuckNuts 247 Sports, you see him on your screen right now, ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Mr. Patrick Murphy.
That was way too nice of an introduction, Andy, but thank you very much.
Hey, I only call it like I see it, and we'll talk about that potential bribe or two after the show. So let's get into it, Pat. Buckeyes, huge win over the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers yesterday. 63-10. They were like a 27.5-point favorite. They not only cover the spread finally for the first time this season, they do it almost twice as much. Buckeyes pile up 562 total yards. They hold the Hilltoppers to 284. Ohio State 358 through the air, 202 on the ground. First 200-yard rushing game of the season. And it was OSU quarterback Kyle McCord who was named as the official starter by Ryan Day this past Tuesday. He was 19 of 23, 82% of his passes complete for 318 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. However, the one faux pas of the game, he took a 3-yard strip sack on OSU's second drive of the game that did result in Western Kentucky recovering the fumble for OSU's only turnover of the game, and it led to their first score, which was a 42-yard field goal. Marvin Harrison, his favorite target, led all wide receivers 126 yards, 5 catches, 1 touchdown, a 75-yarder, which now goes down as his longest career OSU touchdown catch, beating the 71-yarder that he had last week against Youngstown State. Travion Henderson led all running backs with 13 carries, 88 total yards, 2 more touchdowns, had 2 last weekend against Youngstown State to now bring his season total to 4. But really, Pat, we're going to get into this. Defense played one hell of a football game. 8 tackles for loss, including 2 sacks, and they forced 4 turnovers, 2 of which were defensive touchdowns. Tommy Eichenberg led all defenders with 10 tackles. His counterpart, Steele Chambers, 8 tackles, 1 for loss, 1 interception, almost had a fumble recovery in the end zone that defensive tackle Tyleik Williams recovered for one of Ohio State's 2 defensive touchdowns, but nonetheless still a great game out of Steele Chambers. And the other defensive touchdown, this is a guy we're probably going to be talking about quite a bit, and I know you're probably just as excited as I am to see him come out and do some player interviews down there at the Woody on Wednesday nights in the future. True freshman cornerback Jermaine Matthews Jr. out of Cincinnati picked off backup quarterback Bronson Barron's pass, takes it 58 yards to the house for his first career touchdown. And then we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention 2 other freshmen for Ohio State, redshirt freshman quarterback Devin Brown and true freshman wide receiver Carnell Tate, hooked up for a 28-yard touchdown pass in the 4th quarter, that being now both of their first career OSU touchdowns. So, Pat, give it to me. The offense, even more specifically Kyle McCord, 1 yard off of his personal best with that 319. He had 318 his true freshman year in the one game he started against Akron. Did Ryan Day make the right choice in Kyle McCord, and what did you see out of him yesterday that maybe we haven't seen the previous 2 games? Just your thoughts on his play in general.
Yeah, it certainly looks like Ryan Day made the right decision. And look, I think everything we say here with the caveat, we should take with the caveat that next week we're going to have the real test, right? That's what we're going to know. That's when we're going to really get a good sense of how Ohio State is going to look this year. And Kyle McCord specifically going on the road for just the second time, his first real test after the Indiana game. But look, I think you've seen flashes of this from Kyle McCord the first couple weeks of the season. He's consistently gotten better as he's gotten more comfortable and settled in. He mentioned after the game that when he knew this whole week that he was the guy, he wasn't going to have to worry about when Devin Brown was coming into the game, or maybe more importantly, splitting reps during the week, which is something we probably didn't talk about as much over the last couple weeks, and how much that changed things for him. But some really nice throws. I mean, we saw the deep shot to Marvin Harrison Jr. last week. You get another one in this when he recognizes the guys couldn't cover Marv, right? He just runs past the defender, no help over the top to do anything, and Kyle put it right where it needed to be. I liked really I think it was the first touchdown to Emeka. He looks left, that pulls the defender over and finds Emeka wide open for an easy catch and takes a few steps into the end zone. Second one, Emeka was wide open again. But just good recognition from Kyle. You mentioned the fumble. That's something he's certainly got to learn from. I mean, you can't, if you're going to take the sack there, which good coverage by the Hilltoppers, and there wasn't anything open downfield. If you got to take the sack there, just take the sack. Make sure you hold on to the football and live to fight another day. As he said after the game, a 2nd and 15 is better than the opponent coming the other way with the ball. So, look, I really like what Kyle did, and I think it's a good start. Is he C.J. Stroud, Justin Fields level at this point? No, but I think he is making the progress that Ryan Day hoped, and you're seeing why the Buckeyes believed he could be QB1.
So if Devin Brown, okay, first off, do you think Devin Brown got meaningful reps in the first 2 games?
I think more so, obviously, against Youngstown State, but, to me, and I've said this a few times over the past few weeks, like, Kyle's been the starter. They just were getting the other guys some reps. And yep. I think that was very clear after the way the Indiana game played out. Now, as I mentioned, maybe that was different in practice. We're not there for those. So, how they handled the reps each week in practice, that could have been the major difference. But on game day, Kyle was the guy, and Devin was clearly the number 2. The number of reps were good for Devin. Did it tell us a ton about what he can do? No. I think that, we saw enough, though, to think right now, at least for me, Kyle is more set to run this offense. Devin can do some things, but, it's not like, and this crossed my mind last week, it's not like Devin's an explosive runner, right? He's not Braxton Miller. He's not even JT Barrett running the ball. So, he's not a change of pace quarterback. Yeah, you can call some different things when he's in the game just because he's probably a little bit better of an athlete and certainly more willing to run. But it's not like you bring him in and all of a sudden the offense changes and you're doing all these different quarterback things and he can pick up big chunk yards with his leg. He's not the fastest guy in the world. He's not particularly elusive. He's a fine runner, and I think it certainly could be a part of the Ohio State offense, but because he's not as polished of a quarterback in terms of passing the ball as Kyle McCord right now, and he doesn't give you something completely different with his legs, I think you go with the guy that has a bit more experience and is probably a little bit better, further along, I guess I should say, in kind of his passing development.
Yeah, it seems to me personally, I don't think we saw the meaningful reps, at least in the Indiana game, out of Devin Brown like Ryan Day promised. To your point, though, Youngstown State, Devin Brown did come in and had a drive there in the second quarter, 4th offensive possession of the game. Buckeyes were only up by a touchdown, and Ryan Day sent Devin Brown in, said, lead us down the field and get a touchdown. At least that's what you assume that Ryan Day told Devin Brown, and that's what Devin Brown did. He had a meaningful drive there. Other than that, it does seem like Ryan Day pretty much felt that Kyle McCord was going to be his guy, kind of regardless of the situation, But I am very impressed myself at what Kyle McCord has done. The last 2 games he's settled in, but to your point, Notre Dame coming up this coming weekend is definitely probably going to be the real true test, because at this point, Kyle McCord just doesn't seem to have faced a legitimate defense. I mean, this Western Kentucky defense coming in, they had only returned 4 starters from last year, and they were giving up 24 points to South Florida. They were giving up 22 points at home to FCS Houston Christian. So maybe this wasn't the best indicator of where Kyle McCord is at, but certainly looked better the last 2 games than he did against Indiana. So I will tip my hat as well to Kyle McCord so far in the last 2 games in his quarterback play.
Yeah, I think so. And I think and I think this was the big thing from this game. You wanted, as a Buckeye fan, to feel confident going into next week in kind of all facets, right? And specifically since we're talking about quarterback play, I think you feel pretty good that Kyle McCord can go out, even in a tough environment in South Bend. And we haven't seen him in that, right? So we don't know, you expect that he will handle that the way that Ohio State quarterbacks have in the past, but we haven't seen him in those type. Indiana was probably 50-50 with Hoosier and Buckeye fans. So that wasn't a raucous atmosphere. But going into South Bend, assuming he handles that right, you expect he can get the ball to these guys. He can run the offense. He can hand the ball off to Travion and the other running backs. And that's what you need him to do. With the amount of weapons, with everything that Kyle McCord has around him, you don't need to be a superstar. That's just a bonus if he continues to progress and becomes that. So, I think most fans, I know there's, people on Twitter who have had their sides, Devin Brown versus Kyle McCord, but I think for the most part, if you're thinking rationally here and you have no dog in the fight, you feel pretty good that that Kyle McCord can go into Notre Dame Stadium and help you run that offense effectively.
So the offensive line, you feel like that they're progressing? Did they play a little better against Western Kentucky, or did we see kind of more of the same? I mean, 2 of the 3 offensive penalties that Ohio State committed yesterday were by offensive linemen. One by Josh Simmons on a false start, one by Carson Hinsman, the center, on an illegal snap. Of the 10 total offensive penalties so far in the first 3 games, half have been committed by offensive linemen, which isn't necessarily that out of the ordinary, right? But Josh Simmons has committed 3 penalties, 2 on Carson Hinsman. So are they the best options right now, you feel? Or maybe is it time for Justin Fry to try a Vic Cutler at center who was battling Carson Hinsman, or a Taygrid Tashabola over there at left tackle? First of all, what were your thoughts on the offensive line play? And then, once again, are they the best options and the best fit right now?
I do think it was better against Western Kentucky, but I think you also have to realize that it's Western Kentucky, and it should look good. It was certainly a step in the right direction, as there were still some issues against Youngstown State. You mentioned the penalties. That's something they certainly have to continue to clean up. It's not an alarming amount of penalties. I mean, obviously you'd love to play a clean game, no penalties, especially on the offensive line, and just dominate out there. But penalties do happen from time to time. I'm not, if it were 5 or 6 penalties a game, I'd be a bit more concerned. I do think it's a little bit concerning that Josh Simmons, who had penalty issues last year at San Diego State, continues to make them, but he has cut down numbers wise. So to kind of transition into the second part of your question, like, as from what we've seen, this is the best 5. The 2 practices we got to see early in fall camp, there wasn't much in the way of evidence that any of the other guys had pushed. We'd heard Luke Montgomery's name come up quite a bit, but are you going to throw a freshman in there at one of the tackle spots right now? I don't know. That's a lot to ask. I think that would be something that would happen if you were to if either there was an injury or you lose a game and it's really bad from one of the tackles. I think Josh Fryer's played really well. I think the right side of the offensive line, and I'll even include Carson Hinsman, the center, in there, as taking into account that he's playing he's a sophomore, redshirt freshman, but he's playing his first games. He didn't play at all last year. So I think that the right side of the offensive line has played really well. The left side, I've been a little bit disappointed with Donovan Jackson, a guy who a lot of people thought would come in and be an All-American at left guard. And then Josh Simmons still very much seems to be kind of developing into this role as the left tackle, playing at a Big Ten level, obviously different than playing right tackle for San Diego State last year. So I'm not convinced entirely by the offensive line, especially as they start to play some of these bigger games, Notre Dame and Big Ten opponents consistently. But I don't know if there's anyone that's better, right? You would assume Justin Fry, who's there every day and watching these guys and has coached offensive line for a long time, and his assistant, Mike Salini, and they've got Joe Philbin as an advisor there. You'd assume that those guys who are all pretty familiar with offensive line play would recognized they needed to make a change. So I'm going to stick with what the coaches have seen here, but it hasn't been overly impressive, I'll be honest there.
Well, you mentioned Notre Dame's offense and all the firepower they have, especially not just on the field, but on the sidelines there, the coaching staff. Ohio State's defense yesterday, once again, played just a hell of a game. Like I said, 4 turnovers, 2 for touchdowns, the Jermaine Matthews pick, the Tyleik Williams recover for the fumble. Is this a defense that you feel had a good enough test against a Western Kentucky offense that we were all talking up throughout the week? Austin Reed, their quarterback, receiver Malachi Corley, who some are projecting as being a first couple of rounds kind of NFL draft pick in this year's upcoming draft. They held them in check. And do you feel that Ohio State's defense played well enough and this was a good enough test going into South Bend next weekend?
Yeah, I do think that this was a good test. It was a good way with the way the schedule set up. And look, I think you would have liked to dominate the first 2 games, kind of have a similar score to this, and then face a team with the passing offense that Western Kentucky has. Obviously didn't dominate the first 2 games, but I did like that the defense, specifically the secondary, which did not get tested in those opening 2 games, the way they played. Not that Western Kentucky has Ohio State level receivers, but as you mentioned, they have a very talented quarterback who Ryan Day said multiple times last week is going to be in the NFL. They have the wide receiver you mentioned in Corley, who can certainly do some things. But just in general, I think we needed to see this secondary go against a team that's going to throw the ball around a bit more before they face Sam Hartman next week and the wide receivers at Notre Dame. I would have not felt nearly as good if, Western Kentucky had gone out and thrown for 350 yards and a couple touchdowns. I like the way Ohio State responded after giving up that touchdown and, adjusted to some of the things that Western Kentucky was doing. I think you're going to have to be able to do that at Notre Dame because they can do some different things. And I'm sure Marcus Freeman and his offensive coaches will have some stuff cooked up that Ohio State hasn't seen yet. I think that's a positive. But yeah, the secondary was tested. I don't know if it was like the biggest test, but it was certainly a bigger test. And as Denzel Burke put it after the game, he gave them an A, and he's been a pretty critical grader of the team, of the defense the first 2 weeks. So I think you like to hear that if you're a Buckeye fan.
Absolutely. And Denzel Burke said that he felt that this was really the first true test that they had gotten, that Youngstown State and Indiana weren't, specifically prolific tests as far as a passing offense is concerned. So let's get into Notre Dame then. Irish right now, 9th ranked, undefeated at 4-0. However, they trail Ohio State in this series 2-5. That is, Ohio State leads the series 5-2. Last time that the Buckeyes played the Irish in South Bend, 1996, ended up winning that game 29-16. There was only one other game that took place in Notre Dame Stadium, and that was in 1936, which was the last time that Notre Dame has beaten Ohio State. It's been almost 100 years, more like what? If I can do quick math, that's like 84 years, 85 years, something like that. So it's been a long time since
No math.
Yeah, you know what? It's still too early in the damn morning. It's almost noon, and it's still too early for me to do math. What am I trying to do here, Pat? Yeah, I'm trying to fool everybody thinking I'm smart. But it's been a long time since the Irish have beaten the Buckeyes. What do you see so far out of this Notre Dame team that truly gives you some concern that they not only can win the game, but maybe do it somewhat decisively?
I mean, I think, if you go back to last year, it's not like Ohio State was perfect in that game. I mean, they only win by 11, right? And trailing at halftime, I think the fact that Sam Hartman's come in from Wake Forest and played as well as he has should certainly give Buckeye fans pause a little bit because he's a legitimate college quarterback going to be taken in the NFL. I know he's a little undersized for an NFL quarterback, but a guy that I think maybe in the later rounds will be an interesting pick in the NFL draft. They've been able to run the ball effectively, 28th in the country rushing the ball, 204 yards per game. So, look, this is an offense behind a really big, talented offensive line that can do some things. And so I think that's, last year they weren't able to do as much offensively. So that's certainly a factor. I think defensively, Ohio State should be able to get after Notre Dame. And that's where, this game could become a little bit of a shootout, going back and forth with two potential high-powered offenses. I think it'll be interesting to see what the pass rush is like from Ohio State. Obviously we saw a little bit more of that this week with the guys not getting necessarily sacks, but getting pressures. I think that's going to be key to keeping the Notre Dame offense in check for sure.
Are we maybe not giving the defensive line as much credit? Are we being too critical on Ohio State's defensive line at this point? Because they really, they haven't necessarily gotten into the backfield, gotten after the quarterback maybe as much as we'd like. And I mean, with guys like JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, who were the top 2 rated defensive ends coming in as, true freshmen, and now here they are in their 3rd year, it's kind of like, are we not seeing as much as what we thought we'd see out of them? Or is this just Jim Knowles' scheme and the way he runs his defense, where the defensive ends are maybe not going to pop as little bit as much as we'd like?
I think even in this scheme, you would still like to see a bit more production from guys that are as talented as these two. You certainly expected that coming into the season. You mentioned their rankings as the top 2 defensive ends. JT Tuimoloau has certainly shown what he can do, right? You think back to the Penn State game last year and just kind of how he took that game over. Jack Sawyer moving back to defensive end from that Jack hybrid position was certainly something we talked about a lot in the offseason, thinking he would be another dominant force for the Buckeyes. I think they've started to be more productive just in terms of getting pressure and whatnot, but you haven't seen the sacks. You haven't seen the tackles for a loss. It just hasn't come, which has surprised me. And I do wonder, just rewatching some of the first 2 games, okay, are they not taking it easy, but have they shown everything that they can do, this group? JT Tuimoloau, I know he can do more than just kind of bull rush a offensive tackle. I know he's got moves. I know Jack Sawyer has some moves too. So are they saving things maybe for this Notre Dame game? And is that a good idea? Can you just kind of turn it on against Notre Dame and, be all of a sudden this dominant pass rush? Because they're going to have to get after Sam Hartman, whether that's through the defensive ends, through the defensive tackles, whether they have to bring pressure, which Jim Knowles certainly will do at times. It's going to be essential to get some pressure on him and not let him just sit back there and be able to, try and attack this Ohio State secondary. So yeah, I mean, that's one of probably, if we're talking just the defense side of the ball, probably my biggest concern going in there is, do they have the pass rush to make Sam Hartman uncomfortable and affect the Notre Dame passing game?
Well, and there's good reason, right? I mean, Sam Hartman, here's a dude that's 5th right now in the country with 1,061 passing yards. He's 3rd in efficiency at a 217.8. Leads the entire nation with 13 passing touchdowns, and Pat has yet to throw an interception. So I guess if there's going to be any time to create some havoc and maybe dispel the myth that right now is Sam Hartman that everybody's drooling over, and obviously for good reason, this game would be an opportunity to do so. And you just mentioned actually Notre Dame's rushing attack. As much hype as there is around Sam Hartman, should we maybe be concentrating a little bit more, talking a little bit more about running back Audric Estime? I mean, here's a guy who right now leads the country, 521 rushing yards, which is 101 yards more than the guy who sits in 2nd place, which is Appalachian State's Nate Noel, who has 420. So, and he's got 5 touchdowns, which is now tied for 4th in the country. So, as much as we may be looking at Notre Dame's passing attack, and once again, for good reason, because Sam Hartman and that receiving core you just talked about for Notre Dame, I mean, they're lights out so far at this point in the season. But should we maybe be taking a little bit more of a look? And I'm assuming Jim Knowles and Ryan Day, especially in Larry Johnson, they're all taking a real good look at what Notre Dame's rushing attack has been able to do at this point in the season.
Yeah, Estime to me is kind of the X factor for Notre Dame in terms of the offense in this game. Last year against Ohio State, 9 rushes for 21 yards, wasn't able to really get going. This offensive line, I think, is better. I think he's a better player. I think having Sam Hartman in the passing attack makes him better. And, I do think, as we mentioned some of these stats, it's important to point out in case people forgot, Notre Dame has played more games than most of the rest of the teams in the country, having played that week 0 game in Dublin. But still, the numbers are what they are, and he's been a very good running back. You said it, 521 yards, 5 touchdowns on 63 carries. So, yeah, definitely somebody that Ohio State will have to be aware of. They will have to contain him. And look, Ohio State's defense – excuse me, my dog is losing her mind in the back.
You need to get in
Ohio State's
him or a her.
Her. She
Get
was
her
just
on
outside,
camera.
So I don't know what,
Listen, never apologize for a dog coming on the show, man.
But Ohio State's defense has played well against the rushing attack so far this year. The defensive tackles, as much as we talk negatively about the defensive ends earlier, the defensive tackles have played really well and been able to contain that. So, like I said, I think it's certainly a potential X factor if they can get that rushing game going, and then if Ohio State can keep it in check.
So on the other side of the ball then, I mean, it sounds, elementary. What does Ohio State's offense need to do to beat Notre Dame's defense? Obviously, protect the quarterback, allow Kyle McCord time to throw the ball. Hopefully, Marvin Harrison has another 100-yard game. But you mentioned Emeka Egbuka before. 4 catches, 57 yards for 2 touchdowns yesterday. Another, 1 or 2 touchdowns against Youngstown State? Yeah. So,
yeah,
1 touchdown. So, Emeka Egbuka, Cade Stover had a good day yesterday, too. 5 catches, 90 yards. So, could Cade Stover be an X factor for the Buckeyes offensively against this Notre Dame defense? Maybe do you try and get Trey Henderson out of the backfield a little bit? We saw him catch some passes here last couple of games and not look too bad catching out of the backfield.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, if as much as we're talking about, okay, here's what Notre Dame can do, there's a podcast happening probably in South Bend right now that's 2 guys worrying about, oh God, this Ohio State offense and how do you slow this down even with a young quarterback playing on the road, right? There's just so many weapons. And that's where, you the last 2 games, you've really seen it get going with these guys. TreVeyon Henderson, they've found him in space. What I think is going to be so interesting is, okay, what hasn't Ohio State shown us offensively? What is Ryan Day and the rest of his offensive staff saved for this game to maybe, surprise Notre Dame a little bit? Because there's got to be some stuff, right? And maybe it's just expanding on what they've done already. But, I think Cade Stover certainly could be a part of that. I think, TreVeyon Henderson moving around a little bit more, maybe some Xavier Johnson that we haven't seen do too much. I know, obviously he played a big part with that touchdown pass against Georgia. So, yeah, I think that there could definitely be a number of X factors in this game. And then, how does Notre Dame contain that? Because this Notre Dame defense hasn't been elite. We've seen them give up some plays, right? So, like I said before, this game, if Ohio State's defense isn't able to shut down Notre Dame, this could be a bit of a shootout type of game as opposed to last year, which was certainly low scoring and didn't have a ton of offense.
All right, so before we jump off here, Mr. Patrick Murphy from BuckNuts 247 Sports, your offensive game plan, your key to success, what Ohio State needs to do ultimately. Cook us up a game plan, what they need to do to beat Notre Dame.
Yeah, for me, I would like to see a lot of what we saw against Western Kentucky. And that's easy to say, right? Because they put up 63 points and 500 some yards, but it was the balanced attack. You got the running game going. You were able to have, as you mentioned off the top, over 200 rushing yards, and you had 3 touchdowns on the ground. You were able to get a big play from Chip Tranum, that 40-yard touchdown run. And, the passing game, I don't think we have to worry about that unless, like I said, Kyle McCord just can't deal with the atmosphere. I don't think that's going to be a problem. Obviously, all of that centers around the offensive line playing its best game because, like we said about the Ohio State defensive line, if they get pressure on Kyle McCord regularly, they being Notre Dame, it's going to be a problem. If you can't run the ball because there's no holes, it's going to be a problem. So for me, it's having this balanced offensive attack, being creative in some of the play calls. Look, Ryan Day has generally, done a great job in terms of play calling, but I want to see the Ryan Day that came out against Georgia and, no fear. We're just going to go win this game. Obviously, they didn't win that game, but put it all on the line, right? And, showcase that you deserve to be a top 5, top 4 team early in the season, at least from the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, you just mentioned Xavier Johnson. God, give me some more X, man. I mean, X exploded last year, and he and Julian Fleming really have been very quiet so far this year. I think those two guys, to be honest with you, they could be the X factors because maybe Notre Dame is keying on Ibuka, Stover, Moneyman a little bit more, and that opens up the door for guys like X and Julian to kind of get out there and make some plays. Could be.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just to your point, there's just so many weapons, right? Like, how do you? That's what That's why Ohio State's offense should be so dangerous. Is okay, you're gonna take away Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka like Indiana was able to do a little bit in week 1. Well, Cade Stover and Julian Fleming are both out there, right? Xavier Johnson can still do some things. Travion Henderson, we could just list guys all day, right? We just saw Carnell Tate to catch his first touchdown, the freshman wide receiver. So there's just so many weapons. Again, for me, it comes down to what happens up front, and that offensive line has to play great against Notre Dame.
All right, so are you brave enough to give us a final score at this point, or do you need to do a little bit more homework? I don't blame you, because I think I still need to do a little bit more research myself. I'm not ready to give a final score, but I agree with everything you said as far as keys to success. I think that if Ohio State goes in there, they protect well, Kyle McCord's got time to throw, and they find like a couple of guys that have been kind of hidden, not hidden like a Fleming in an X, but, these are guys that have been largely quiet so far. Maybe even in the backfield, Chip and Chop. Chop's been fairly quiet. I mean, we haven't seen Chop a whole lot. He comes in yesterday largely in scrub time. So, Chip and Chop maybe handling a third of the load like we kind of have seen, up until yesterday. So are you brave enough, though, or are you going to hold off?
I need to watch a little bit more Notre Dame. I watched that opening weekend game when it was on, but then it's kind of conflicted. I started watching some at the end of last week. Look, I will say this. Coming into yesterday's game against Western Kentucky, I was talking to a buddy of mine, and I was like, I need to see something in this game to feel good about picking Ohio State against Notre Dame. From what I'd seen of Notre Dame and kind of looking at the box scores, reading some of the stuff, I was like, this seems like a dangerous game for Ohio State. If the Buckeyes, if this had been another 35-7 game against Western Kentucky and things hadn't gone as well for Ohio State, I saw some really good things. So I feel much more confident. We'll see as the week goes on a final score prediction, but I definitely feel more confident in picking the Buckeyes than I did even just yesterday morning. Not that Western Kentucky is Notre Dame, and I don't want to make it seem like that game changed it. It just it let me know that this secondary, it looks pretty legit. That this offense can be a balanced attack and kind of all the things we talked about. So as we sit here right now, I don't know what the score will be. I'm probably leaning towards picking Ohio State, but I think we're in for a hell of a game. I'm going to be honest.
100% could not agree with you anymore. Absolutely. And to your point yesterday, that performance on both sides of the ball definitely gave me more confidence in Ohio State being able to go into South Bend and give a hell of a game, because had they looked a little lackluster, I would have thought, South Bend, things may get ugly. 2 touchdowns, 17 points maybe. But after seeing what we saw yesterday out of this Buckeye team, I agree with you, man. I'm a lot more confident in what they're able to do. So anything else, Mr. Murphy, that you would like to throw in before we check on out of here of the Yamo's Hey Bucks podcast?
No, I think we touched on most of it.
Why don't you let everybody know where they can hit you up at on the socials, baby?
Yep. I am on Twitter or X or whatever it's called today, @_Pat_Murphy. I think it's the same on Instagram. I'm trying to use Instagram more in case Twitter just disappears. I'm still not very good at it, but I do try and post more stuff on there than I did in the past. So, I think it's the same @_Pat_Murphy on both.
Well, when you've got like 57 different options for social media nowadays, it's impossible to try and get on all of them. You know what I mean? I'm not a big IG, grammar, whatever the kids are calling it nowadays. I don't know. Stick to the X or Twitter. And yes, I'm an old fogey. I still get on quite a bit of Facebook. So, hey, once again, Pat, appreciate you coming on, man. I know you got things going on today. Get out of here. Go check out your Rams playing at Old Fields there on 4th Street down near the campus area, right?
Yep, that's the
All right.
plan.
There it is. Well, hey, enjoy your afternoon, sir. Once again, appreciate you coming on. I'm going to see you down there at the Woody on Wednesday, I'm sure, for the big interview session week leading up to this weekend's game against the 9th-ranked Fighting Irish in South Bend. So for Mr. Patrick Murphy of BuckNuts 247 Sports, thanks once again, brother, for coming on. Most appreciate you as always. I'm Andy Evans. This has been Yamo's Hey Bucks, and we will talk to you guys next week.